Hello, I'm Dr. Basil Considine. I'm here from the ACU Online Writing Center, and today we're going to be doing a new installment in our Intro to Grant Writing webinar series, where we're going to be looking at how to apply for Study, Research, and Teaching Abroad awards. Now, this is one of a larger series, and so I want to start by showing you that we do have webinar recordings that are focused more generally on grant writing, and that you can watch several iterations of, and that are focused more particularly on fellowships and the dynamics of applying for a fellowship. For this session, we will go over some of the same ground, but we are going to primarily focus on how to seek out, identify, and apply for funding to go and either study abroad, do research abroad, or to teach abroad. So with no further ado, let's go ahead and dive into some of the terminology. So scholarships in general refers to financial gifts that do not have to be repaid. And what is a scholarship and what is a fellowship? Sometimes these are used synonymously, but scholarships usually have some sort of eligibility conditions. If it's something you're going to renew, like if you have an academic scholarship, they require that you have certain grades, as opposed to a fellowship, which generally has a service commitment. You might have to work as a research assistant, you might have to be a teaching assistant, you might have to show up to a certain number of sessions. Usually a fellowship is more financially significant, larger than a scholarship, and usually they're considered to be more prestigious. It goes with the scale of things. Often fellowships are something that you might receive starting at the graduate level, while scholarships you might find at the undergrad and graduate level. And grants are sums of money that are given by some sort of organization, could be a university, could be an external organization, could be a government, sum of money that is being given for a specific purpose. Now, you'll also see things called internal and external awards. An internal meaning something that's from your institution and generally limited to people at that institution, and external meaning it's somewhere outside that you can apply for and that probably other people from other institutions can also apply for. Now, a fellowship application is usually going to have a number of components in common. A curriculum vitae, this is, if you're not familiar with it, it's similar to a resume, but with a different outline and a different focus, and also a narrative for whatever it is that you are proposing to do. This could be studying a language, it could be teaching, it could be research, sometimes a combination of all three. But having that curriculum vitae is a way of summarizing things that you have done, and then the narrative is summarizing things that you propose to do. Now, these days, there's going to be some sort of application form, almost always online now. Some things, if you have a research project, they might ask for a budget. Generally, if it's just studying or just going and teaching, they won't ask for the budget. But for a research project, they want to know that it's something that you can afford to do. And 2 to 3 letters of recommendation. Now, if you just joined us, we started out by talking about some different terminology about the difference between scholarships, fellowships, and grants. And for the purposes of the programs that we're going to be looking at today, you will see that there's actually a considerable variation in which terms are used for these. And I think it's helpful to keep in mind, if they give you the money, do you care how much exactly what it's called? Now, in my case, I can say that I have received scholarships, I've received fellowships, and I've received grants. The amount of money has varied greatly. I've always been grateful for it, but sometimes when you have specific goals, you might want to get a specific award in order to help achieve some of those goals. More on that as we go. Now, in terms of writing these things, when preparing these components here, some of the common errors are not allowing sufficient time to write, or if you're getting letters of recommendation, not allowing sufficient time for your recommenders to write that. I've written many letters of recommendation for students and former students and colleagues over the years. The general courtesy is to ask at least a month in advance, and that if it's the summer, to ask 2 months in advance. I will tell you frankly that of all the requests that I've gotten, they've almost been for something 2 weeks or less. In which case you want to be nice and polite and to make it as easy as possible for the person writing it. Don't make them do lots of research, give them the information that will be helpful. Not paying attention to instructions. So while a resume and a CV are similar, they have different formats, and things that you might not think to include in one will go in the other. So a resume, you might be listing all the software that you know how to use and particular skills. That tends not to go in the CV. The CV is more things you've done, jobs you've had, research you've done, publications, conference papers, things like that. Poor writing, I think if you're coming to a writing center program, you know that we believe that we want to help you communicate things as clearly and with the least amount of distraction possible. This goes hand in hand with failure to edit the application and happens all the time when you don't have enough time. I will say that a narrative, the writing does not need to be perfect, but if it looks like you haven't given sufficient time and attention to create a polished proposal, some people reviewing it may feel that this reflects your work in general, rather than the fact that you were rushed. Failure to convey that your research or what you plan to do with the study skills is interesting. Now, I'd invite the participants at this point to share in the chat if there are any areas that you are especially interested in. And this is not limited just to the topic for study and research abroad and teaching abroad, but if you have a more general area that you are interested in getting funding to support that, by all means, share that in the chat room, and we have some opportunities to integrate that into the examples that we look at. Other common errors, not showing how you know that what you're doing is effective. Now, this is something where people often say, well, that's just about if I'm doing like scientific research. Well, no, actually, part of that is when you are applying for, say, money to study abroad, to demonstrate that this is something that will be helpful to you. Do you have a prior experience? Is there something that you have realized or that other people have told you is very important for you to get that is associated with study abroad? Now, I see an example was shared in the chat, interest in STEM pedagogy in developing countries. Very big thing. In many countries outside of Western Europe and North America, the most common majors are in engineering. I have a friend from Colombia, and when I learned that she was an engineer, I was like, oh, that's great. Do you work in that? She said, no, 80% of the students at my school were engineering major. It's just kind of the default choice. And so this is something that, just as in the US, there is great demand in other countries. And also, just as there's a lot of variation within the US about what you might learn at different levels of schooling, there are also many variations there. And sometimes in other countries, pathing earlier, where if you don't progress to a certain point, or if you don't score high on an exam, you may be pathed away from STEM at an early age. Project that is too ambitious. This is something where it's always good to have a conversation with an advisor and ask them, what is it that you think will come out of this? Is this a doable project? Is this something that I need to make it more clear how I can do this? Now, as an example that we'll be discussing later on, so I was the US Fulbright faculty scholar to Madagascar last year. I went and taught in the third poorest country in the world, and I did a lot. I taught at the university. I traveled as a speaker. I set up a writing center. I brought an opera company and went on tour. This was something that was doable and demonstrably doable because I could have concrete examples of my doing those things. Both of my, two of my 3 recommendation letters were written by deans of universities that I worked at saying, oh, Basil came and set up this program in the time that the Fulbright program will have. And so what might otherwise have been construed as too ambitious, there is a testimony saying this is doable. And same thing with what you propose. You may look at it and say, this is something I can definitely do. And you want to make sure that you also answer the question of, do other people know that this is doable? And this goes hand in hand with lack of experience in the field. You might have things you want to do that you might not be prepared to do right now, or that other people will perceive that. And that's partly what you show in your CV, partly what you discuss in your narrative, partly what your letters of recommendation do. And this is one of those things where when you are requesting letters, it's really helpful to have your recommenders speak to different parts of your strengths to show that experience, that capability to do things. Project that will have limited impact. So if you are applying for a study abroad award and you say, yeah, I just want to experience Italy, it'll be lots of fun. Well, I am certainly not saying that studying in Italy will not be lots of fun, but that brief summary I've given you does not suggest that it will have great impact on me. Now, if I talk about wanting to master the language and in touch with heritage, or to delve into a topic, or to have experiences that are much more real, present, something by being there, doing things, or having access to that, yeah. Limited support from your institution, that comes in different ways. Sometimes people will want to see that you have received financial support from them, but that's less common these days. What is more common is if you are applying for an award and there are no recommendation letters from wherever you are right now, whether that's teaching and whether that's being an administrator or studying, just having no letters there at all is considered by many reviewers to be a red flag. Now, it doesn't need to be a majority, just having one there as part of your 2 or 3 automatically addresses that concern. Okay, now we're going to talk about some sample resources. And so this one here, grant proposals, or give me the money. It is a nice, concise resource that I recommend. We talk about it some more in the previously recorded other editions of this webinar, so I won't dwell on it now. But what we will do is we'll talk about some resources for finding scholarships, fellowships, and grants. And starting with fellowships, Duke University has an excellent database there. UCLA does as well. One of my colleagues from Boston University started ProFellow, which has lots and lots of curated resources related to fellowship applications, most of which is available for free. They do offer seminars and coachings on how to find and apply for fellowships, but you can start with the free resources. And if you think that 50 would be great to work with, awesome. Now, ACU also has an Office of Research and Sponsored Programs that has some funding. And even if it's funding that is only available to faculty members, that just means the faculty members are the people who are eligible to apply, but you could work with a faculty person to prepare an application for something that involves hiring you. Some other ones, the University of Illinois, the University of Minnesota's a broad funding database that's showing lots of different financial opportunities that are not restricted to the University of Minnesota, not coming from it. It's just they have assembled this because they send a huge portion of their students abroad to do different opportunities. There's some more sorted by topics. So some examples of funding for research in education leadership are on this page. For K-12 education research, now these are, many of them are for research specifically in the US, but I do know that there have been past Spencer Foundation Awards for research abroad, and that many US Department of Education projects have involved research abroad. Nursing research, we won't dwell on this because I believe we don't have any nursing students in the room right now. And we also talk about it more in some of the other recordings. So before we go into anything else, let's talk about what application materials look like. Because almost all fellowship applications will ask for these materials for study or research abroad. So for in my case, I received the Fulbright Faculty Scholar Award to do study and research abroad. It required that I give them curriculum vitae, an application or proposal narrative. There's an application form that I filled out that was online. In many but not all cases, it requires a language evaluation, and then 3 letters of recommendation. Now, in my case, I was going to Madagascar. I don't know if any of you have heard Malagasy. I speak some Malagasy now, but it's a language that you really only study in that country, and now at 2 university programs in the United States. So they did not require language evaluation. However, I presented proof of my having learned other languages and proof of my fluency in French, which happens to be the second most common language spoken in Madagascar. And also I was teaching in the Anglophone studies or English department, so they wanted me to be teaching in English. Now, if you are watching this on video, I do recommend that you pause this video if you'd like to read it. What I'm going to do is talk through some of the salient features of this in terms of content, going towards that set of wanting to demonstrate competency, that this is a doable project, and to give specifics to back that up. So I mentioned that I have experience in teaching and coaching writing for master's and doctoral students, that I'm fluent in French, which many of the students would have used in school before they started studying English, that I had experience specifically with non-native English speaking students, and that I'd lived and done research in that part of the world before, which is something that I will say not too many Americans make their way down there. Now, I then gave some examples of my doing exactly the kinds of things that they asked about, that they said they were interested in, including helping students graduate, helping students apply for money, helping students publish. And then I referred to this example of my prior work, because 2 of the deans at the University of Tennessee, Chattanooga were writing by letters of recommendation. And so this is tying through and saying, oh, hey, in the time that I was there, look at the stuff that I did that the deans will be talking about. Now, in this case, because it was a teaching and research award, I also listed some things that I could do. I mentioned something else that the committee had said that they were interested in doing. We weren't able to do that ultimately because of COVID, but I mentioned some examples of my research since I was proposing to do research. And had a question about the things in the upper right-hand corner. So the stuff in the upper right-hand corner is partly saying, hey, I know what I'm talking about. I'm qualified to teach there. And partly to highlight a set of things that I thought would catch your attention and say, yes, this is a really good candidate for this. And so the second paragraph in the upper right-hand corner lists a number of awards that I'd gotten for teaching and presentation. And because not everyone who teaches makes that their specialty, in that balance of research, administration, and teaching, it's usually a pick 2 out of 3. And that's not to knock the other people there, but in this case, they were looking for someone to do a lot of teaching. And so I made sure to highlight my credentials there. Now, the thing that people have the most trouble with, besides the application narrative, is usually getting the letters of recommendation. And so I do recommend asking at least once a month in advance, preferably 3. Now, for all the examples that we're going to be discussing later, that is actually 3 to 4 months away. So if one of those appeals to you, great. You're still in a good period to solicit a letter of recommendation. I've done this in August before, for when people wanted to apply for September deadlines, and it was a bit of a scramble. we're nice, comfortable ways away. So you want to not only ask for the letter, but to follow up prior to the deadline. I mean, reasonably prior. Like if you've asked them 4 months away, do a check-in 1 month out. If the deadline is a week away and you haven't gotten that, oh, this letter has been received, just send in a check-in thing. Some people will also ask someone if they will be their backup letter writer. I've done that on a number of occasions, being that writer. And what that is it gives you the option, if someone is just unavailable, you can say, hi, I'd like to take you up on that offer. And now, in all these cases, you want to make sure that you give them the material that they need to write a good letter and to write one that has specifics and doesn't take them too much time to create. So include details for how you know them and how long. Give a current CV, a copy of whatever draft materials you have, and some of the things that you want to include. Now, some reference writers, some letter writers will say, write up a sample of the kind of thing that you want, and I will write it in my own words if I agree with it, or I will paraphrase it. And then there's some people who will look at it, say, okay, and they'll put it on the letterhead, they'll sign it, and they'll submit it as is. But what they're doing is when they sign that, they're saying, I believe and agree with these things. I'm putting my imprimatur on that. So though it might feel a little weird the first time you do it to essentially ghostwrite your own letter, if your faculty person agrees with it, if your letter recommendation writer agrees, sure. Now, when you are applying for a opportunity that does require that you be doing some sort of work, and I say grant proposal here, even though we're talking primarily about those fellowships and scholarships today, it's going to follow a similar structure, except that you're going to have some sort of description of the problem that you're trying to solve, more than just studying, more than just research. It's more than just study or teaching. If you're doing research, you want to, just as with our dissertations, identify a problem or a need that you are aiming to meet with this. If there's research involved, they want to know what costs are going to be involved. And that includes if people are giving you support or equipment. If you say, oh, yes, I'm going to do a documentary in the rainforest on mountain gorillas of West Africa. Okay, great. That sounds expensive in terms of travel and in terms of the equipment you need. And so if your budget shows, oh, yes, this budget works because this research center is providing transportation for me and housing for me free of charge. Okay, you list that as an in-kind or waived cost. So they know that you have that taken care of, and they can see that other people are valuing your work too. Same thing if you have equipment that is being loaned. I worked with a research team last year that was provided with more than $10,000 worth of audio and visual equipment and scientific equipment by their university. So that was a cost that they did not need to pay, but still listing that in their budget helped other people see that, yes, this was a manageable, a doable cost. Supplemental material is usually some sort of work sample. So example, if you were an artist, you would include some photos or video of your art, or a music recording if that's your type of art. If you are a writer, you might include that. For some things where it's teaching, people have actually included teaching evaluations or reports, or an example of their awards. Now, a truism in anything money related is that it takes some to get some. And in this case, it takes some information to get some. So you will have a much easier time if you're looking at a sample application. And if you're able to look at a successful one, that's even better. And you can look on the website for some examples of that for the organization or the opportunity. But my favorite is to ask someone who has won that award recently and gotten that grant, that fellowship. And this is something that when I first started doing it, I felt a little odd about it. And as I've learned more, I've realized, oh, one of the reasons that people can be so generous in sharing information is that you're not in direct competition with them. If they get that award, they're almost always ineligible to apply for it again for 1 or more years. So if you're talking with someone who's a current recipient, great. Uh, they're usually interested in other people doing things similar to them or going to that spot. And so when someone asks me about the application, I'll go ahead and I'll just send them a copy of what I sent in and said, here, if this is helpful to you, here's an example of a successful model. All right, we're going to do a change of focus now. We're going to use most of the rest of our time to talk about certain programs. And I've strongly encouraged questions because we're offering this for students such as yourself. And if it would help you for us to delve into one particular opportunity more, please ask away. So we're going to start with the program that I am an alumnus of, the Fulbright program. Now, if you're not familiar with Fulbright, it is the largest academic exchange program in the world. It sends people from the United States to other countries and takes people from those countries to the United States. And although there are some countries that there are not current exchanges due to safety reasons, it touches almost every country in the world. And this does so through many different avenues, of which 3 are the most common. English Teaching Assistant Awards, for which your qualification is, by the time that you start, that you have a bachelor's degree from a U.S. college or university. Doesn't need to be in teaching, doesn't need to be in English, a bachelor's degree and an interest in talking about American culture, about helping people in foreign countries practice learning, speaking, using English. And they do some training for you as part of the program before you go. Now, the student program is targeted at people who are either about to finish their bachelor's degree or engaged in a master's or doctoral degree, or are recently enough graduated from a bachelor's degree, but have not completed a doctoral degree. Let me put it this way. The student award is for people who are going to study in foreign countries, which can include doing research. And the minimum qualification by the time you start the award is that you have a bachelor's degree completed by the time the award would begin. Now, you could be an active master's student, you could be an active doctoral student, you could even be starting what will be a multi-year process at a foreign university through Fulbright. That's fine. And then faculty or awards, it could be for teaching only, that could be research only, or both teaching and research. And there are a number of subversions there. The question in the chat, I was the 2021 to 2022 U.S. Fulbright Faculty Scholar to Madagascar. So what that means is that for that year, there happened to be 6 of us Fulbrighters. There were 3 doctoral students who were doing research, most of it related to lemurs. There were 2 English teaching assistants. It was the start of the program in that country. And then 1 faculty person, which was myself. Since then, they have worked to expand the number of English teaching assistants. Some countries have a lot more. So Germany has, I believe, 150 English teaching assistant slots available every year. And the number of awards for each country in each category varies. There are a lot for Western Europe. In Africa, there are generally fewer per country, but you don't necessarily need any prior experience in that region. And there are related programs. So if you're looking at this and you say, this is great, but I don't quite qualify. There is, for example, a program that specifically sends American teachers to foreign institutions that is organized by the State Department, and they will teach at their grade level there. So if you were, say, in our EDD program, you're like, it would be really great for my research if I went and taught in, say, Jordan for a year. There's actually an opportunity where you could teach at the middle school or high school level there as part of the exchange. DOD program is basically Germany's version of the Fulbright program. DOD will take people from the rest of the world and bring them to Germany, and take people from Germany and send them to other programs. And one thing to know about the DOD program is that you have different named opportunities based on the level that you are operating at, what degrees you have completed or are working on. And so I would say that because there's so much there, you might not find what you're looking for initially, but if in doubt, either ask our fellowship advisor, who is himself a Fulbright alum, or write the DOD folks. Generally, they will get back to you in less than a week, and they can point you to exactly the thing that you're looking for. And just to round out this is not an exhaustive sample, but the MEXT program takes people to Japan and vice versa. That generally does require some fluency in Japanese or an interest in developing that. And then the Boren Awards are a federally funded program that at the undergraduate level sends people to study abroad, to, among other things, work on their languages. And the fellowship version sends graduate students there. And if you're wondering what the difference between the scholarship and the fellowship is, more money and allowance for research. The fellowships can be extended. Some people will often go for one semester and then extend for a full year, or a summer and the fall. And as fellowships, they have a service commitment that generally involves working for a nonprofit or the US government, or making a good faith effort to do so. If you apply for the for positions that the federal government for 2 years and they don't hire you, they'll ask you to send a couple examples of your applications, but they'll say, okay, your service requirement is waived. Now, language study, you'll see some overlap here. Language study, I've listed some of the major programs. The Boren Awards, these are again for studying abroad. Critical language scholarships, so there's a list of, I think it's currently 17 languages that have been identified as being critical need for the US to have people who have expertise in these languages. And in fact, we're going to go and take a look at those now. So I'm going to change my screen sharing. So the Critical Language Scholars Program has a set of what we'll call less commonly studied languages in the US. These are certainly much more popular than when I first started my collegiate studies, but Arabic, huge need. Azerbaijani, that's more of a regional one. Bangla, as in Bangladesh. Chinese, both Mandarin and Cantonese. Hindi, Indonesian, Japanese, Korean, Persian, Portuguese, Russian, Swahili, Turkish, and Urdu. Now, on this list of the languages here, I've done formal studies only in Hindi and in Japanese, but some of my classmates in different programs have gone on and studied in other languages here. It's competitive, but it is a great opportunity. And if this isn't something that interests you in particular, it might be something that might interest one of your own students or colleagues. I will say that getting paid to spend 2.5 months in an intensive study abroad language institute, you learn a lot, especially when you get to use that language there. Now, one of the other opportunities, Boren is also broad in the looking at here's a set of languages deemed very important. But let's take a look at what's on that list here. You'll see that there are a lot more, and a lot of these are less frequently studied languages. And you'll note here African languages. That includes all languages indigenous to this list of countries in Africa, as well as some things like, say, Hungarian, that are less commonly taught in the United States. Now here, in terms of the preferred countries, we'll see that this is actually most of the world. And we'll just go ahead and look at this map and see that a very large portion of the world has languages that are eligible here, and that although you'll see that Mexico is on here, and Spanish is fairly easy to study in the United States, we are looking at a very large portion of the rest of the world that is not the US, Canada, and Western Europe. Australia and New Zealand can come too. All right, so there is specifically for undergraduate students. So if you have any students or colleagues or children who are following the STEM path, and there's a special award for the Bourne Awards that is allocated for people who are in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. You can see those highlighted here. Graduate students have more flexibility, and they will generally be spending most of their time on that language study, sometimes as an embedded option, and they're also eligible for summer intensive language study. All right, now let's head back to our slide deck here. The DOT program, we talked about this already, but it does include awards that you can get if you've already done some German to pay for full-time German language study in Germany, which is pretty neat. If you are faculty, and in faculty in this case, in many awards includes instructors at the secondary school level as well as at the college level, you may be eligible for awards that for studying through a Goethe Institute, either in online courses or in person, so you wouldn't have to travel for that. And then foreign language area studies, this is something where I'm a two-time FLAS fellow for studying less commonly taught languages. In one case, I went physically to the University of Wisconsin-Madison to study Hindi. And then in the other, I was working through them, but because I was studying Malagasy, we were working online for that. Now, that's a small sampling of the awards that are available, but these are a starting point. If you know where you want to go or what you want to do, then we meaning people at ACU in general, because there are a lot more people than me who can advise on these things, then we would be able to help steer you in the particular direction that you want to go. Now, for teaching English overseas, there are a lot of options that do not require that you have a credential before you apply. Now, the France Teaching Assistant Program in France, TAPIF, that brings people under 26 to France to teach English. It's a wonderful program. One of my friends from Boston University did it. This is separate from the Fulbright English Teaching Assistant Program, which also sends Americans to France. Now, TAPIF is the French government's program. Fulbright is funded by the US federal government, administered by a foundation. The JET program sends Americans to Japan to teach English. I will warn you, people who do the JET program often end up liking Japan so much that they stay there. Korea's equivalent is the EPIC program. And while there are many other programs that will hire people to teach English in Korea, those usually will require that you have either a degree or a certificate in teaching English as a foreign language. But EPIC program, if you were educated in the United States and you have a bachelor's degree or higher, that is sufficient qualification. Okay, Now, we are at a point where we have a little bit of time left. And so we have the opportunity to delve deeper. So this is your opportunity to speak up about something and that you are especially interested in. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to bring up the Fulbright program here, and we'll talk about some of the details there. In general, most of these programs will have fall application dates for a program that will start the following fall. Critical language scholarship, more in those application deadlines are early in the year, in the calendar year. Fulbright deadlines are generally at the start of the academic year, so in September or October, sometimes with an institutional deadline that comes before the national deadline. All right, so with that said, let's look at the Fulbright student program, and the same basic approach we would use for researching opportunities in the English teaching assistant program or the faculty program. All right, so we're going to go ahead and first we're going to do search for Fulbright program advisor, because you might be thinking, well, hold on, I don't want to do this alone. I would like to ask someone who is an expert in this. And if we go to Abilene Christian University, we see that they would like to know earlier in the year that you're interested. That's not to say that it's not possible to work now. But if you're interested in a Fulbright opportunity, I would send Dr. Morris an email. Dr. Morris is the Dean of the Honors College. I would send him an email sooner rather than later. And we're really proud that we have a record for ACU number of English teaching assistants going out this year. Now, if we are looking around here, you see that there's also this award search. So you can plan out what is it that you're looking for in terms of what interests you. And it could be you're more interested in the region, or you could be more interested in the type of award or the opportunity. By the way, some Fulbright students do have awards that involve they're doing teaching at a foreign university because they have a master's degree or they're working on their doctorate, and this is something that is part of their exchange. Now, in this case, let's go ahead and look for study research. And let's say that you happen to decide that you have a particular interest in doing something that involves a language proficiency you have. So we've selected places where it's recommended, but not required that you have language proficiency. And we look through this and we see, okay, Armenia, Belgium, Chile, Colombia, Egypt. All right, so we've got a lot of choices here. But let's say that your particular interest was to go to France. Now, you may be noticing that there are some numbers next to here. So that's the number of student awards available for that country. 8 for Egypt, 20 for France, 20 that are open study. Because if we look past this, you'll see that they're actually 4, 2, 3, 4, 3, and 3. So let me add that up. There are in total 39 Fulbright student awards to France that have a recommended language proficiency. And let me just bring up the whole set of awards for France. And we see, looking at this, okay, so although there are some open study ones where you can pick anywhere in France to do that, there's some that are specific to, for example, the arts, that are specific to a university or to a particular field. The École Normale Supérieure is in Paris. That's one of their most prestigious universities. But there's also, for example, this opportunity in Grenoble. And often the big cities are the ones where there's the most competition. and the most people wanting to go there, just like there are lots of people who want to move to New York City or want to move to Houston or Austin, drawn by all the things in the big city. So if you're doing an open award, it is often more competitive. It is often to your advantage to apply for an exchange with a university that is off the beaten path. Now, if we were to look at the specifics here, we can see, oh, you can actually do this at multiple levels. You could study at the bachelor's level, the master's level, the doctoral level, that they split up those up to 20 awards so that it's about half sciences or half hard and life sciences and half everything else. And that we have some things for people at different levels. And we look at this and we see, oh, you have some flexibility on when it'll start and when it'll end, but they should all be within one of these time ranges, which is convenient because if you are, say, a teacher or teacher administrator in the United States and you're going abroad as a Fulbrighter, it'd be nice to come back and be able to resume your job. By the way, if you get a Fulbright, I've never heard a case of an employer not saying, oh, yes, we'll wait. And I've never heard a case of a study program not saying we will wait. So even if you had something else, a job you're going to start, usually they will wait for you because it's so prestigious here. Now, if we are looking through this, we'll see that in this case, although it's not required, they do recommend some language proficiency, and you would have a self-evaluation that you fill in, and then a foreign language evaluation form that you would have a professional language instructor fill out. Now, the thing where people usually get intimidated is with this letter required for independent study or research at the deadline. And it's really helpful if you have a friend or colleague who has done work in that country, because they will help you navigate the sometimes more opaque websites it's for these institutions to help you find out the email addresses for different professors, which I would say are often not as easy to find for foreign universities as they are for American ones. It's certainly doable. And if you came to the Writing Center and you said, I'm trying to find out who to send this to, we could help you do that for many countries. And tell you some tricks about how to use, say, Google Translate in your web browser to help find that information, even if you're not fluent in that language or fluent in that language yet. Okay, so one of the basic things that happens, this is something that usually throws people off because they see, oh, hold on, they're saying the Fulbright Award does not cover fees or tuition at the institution you're attending. Yes, that is true. And yes, there is in fact an official tuition rate for students who are not citizens of the European Union or France. But the convention is in these programs that if you are attending through that program, that the host institution will waive all or most of your fees. So, for example, I had a roommate who came to study at Boston University to study violin performance, and she came through the Fulbright program. Through her first year there, they covered all the tuition and fees, and they basically gave her a scholarship for all of that. And the second year, even though she had finished her participation in the Fulbright program, they extended that scholarship so she was not paying tuition or fees for that year either. Now, you'd want to talk with the exact institution, but I've never heard of a case of a American student studying through the Fulbright program and being charged more than a nominal fees. And it's usually something like, oh, you were charged the gym fee, and 95 euros is around $100, which for an academic year is a nominal charge. A big thing to keep in mind, dependent financial support. So if you are married, or if you have children, or both, there are some awards that do have financial support, and those are usually more on the faculty side where you would be teaching. And if that is something that is important for you, definitely establish that early in your program search. In my case, if I had been married, I would have gotten, I think, an extra $6,000 or something like that to bring my partner to Madagascar. Now, as a single person at the time, that was not something that concerned me. But it's nice to know that if I did, I would be able to fly them there and more than pay for their groceries. If I had children, then I would have gotten extra money for that as well. So I could have sent the children to a nice school there, etc., etc. So there is, if you've established the terms that you are willing to work, study, or research abroad, it is much easier to find the programs that do qualify for that do have those things that you're looking for. Now, in our remaining time, I'm happy to field any more questions. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show the Fulbright faculty program. That's Fulbright Scholar can be several different things. In this case, Scholar, we are referring to this program that sends US citizens to teach, do research, and other professional projects around the world. I have known some people who worked in the Fulbright program, and they went to go and teach before they finished their doctorate, because they were using their professional experience. They're leveraging, oh, I've been a teacher for X years, I've been an administrator for X years. It's not a requirement that you have a doctorate there. And many people who do Fulbright Scholar as business people, as teaching that, only have a bachelor's degree. What is the standard, what is the expectation in your field that is sufficient combination of experience and degrees will vary based on what you are doing. Now, there are a couple special category things where there's this particular funding, and there are some stuff that are designed specifically people who will have received a doctoral degree by the time they graduate, but don't have it just yet. So the Fulbright postdoctoral awards are in that particular category. And so here, if we were looking at this, we could see, all right, well, what if you wanted to go ahead and find an award in the field of education that you could do after you finish your doctorate? And you'll see that this is giving us a total of 17 awards that are showing up there, including going to Australia, Canada, Czech Republic, France, Israel, Mexico, Spain, Taiwan, Turkey, and this special multifaceted thing for the European Union, and going to Italy, while also doing research in other countries. Personally, that would be my bias, but for me, Florence is most amazing cities in the world, and I would happily live there again. Okay, now jumping back here, let's take a look at this. So I have a friend who did research in the Czech Republic, and we see that if she was applying for this, now that she has her doctorate, you see, all right, does have a terminal degree, a DMA. It is the appropriate profile for early career academics, and that's defined here as people who have been a teacher or scholar for no more than 7 years. So I would no longer be eligible. I've been teaching too long. But I would be eligible in the US Scholar general category. And we see that there are some time constraints. If you're wondering what the award benefits are, they tell you, okay, for that award, here's how much you'd be making. Here's how much they give you to cover your travel costs. and that if you had a dependent, they wouldn't be living as a king, but you'd be able to afford your groceries and for their travel, certainly. Now, if we are looking through this, you'll find that the different awards have different levels, and so the higher you go up rank wise, the more they pay you, commensurate with the other costs that are likely present in your life. Okay, that's probably a good place for us to wrap things up. Uh, there are certainly people who have done research in a country more than once. Usually, for a first Fulbright award, they want you to be getting the most out of the exchange, and that involves, or that is weighed to include not having too much experience. So if you've lived in the country for 10 years and then you came back to the US to study, that's less of a return on your going there for a year versus, you spent a year or two there before, and now you're like, okay, now I want to follow up and do these things to apply the stuff and share the stuff that I've learned since then. So it's something to keep in mind. If you do have extensive experience in that country, is there another country that has similar opportunities that you're interested in? That's a good pausing point for us. As always, please feel free to send us questions at onlinewritingcenter@acu.edu, and to schedule an appointment by going to my.acu.edu and selecting the drop-down list of resources or quick links in Online Writing Center. And you can visit the Online Writing Center for more information. Enjoy this Memorial Day weekend. Have a great evening.